The following news flash is brought to you by the Lone Star Lowdown, providing your daily bulletins for the commodities market. Today in history, news updates, and the inside scoop into the tides of the alternative. The market for Friday, February 19th, 2016 are currently trading with gold at $1,225.73 an ounce, silver $15.33 an ounce, Texas crude $30.77 a barrel, and Bitcoin is currently sitting at about 418 U.S. currency. Today in history, the year 1942. Through Executive Order 9066, President Franklin D. Roosevelt authorized the deportation and incarceration of nearly 130 mainland Japanese Americans who were forcibly relocated from their West Coast homes. The presidential order allowed regional military commanders the power to declare that all people of Japanese ancestry were excluded from the entire West Coast, except, of course, for those within government camps. American concentration camps. Today in history. In recent news, U.S. Attorney Ellen Decker wrote in a court filing today in Riverside, California, that Apple, quote, has the technical ability to comply with the court order and is refusing to assist because of concerns to its business model and public brand marketing strategy. This after Apple CEO Tim Cook a few days ago released a public statement to his customers and investors stating that, quote, the United States government has demanded that Apple take an unprecedented step which threatens the security of our customers. We oppose this order, which has implications far beyond the legal case at hand. This bold statement came in defiance to a court order by California Judge Sherry Pine for Apple to develop a new version of the iPhone's operating system, which would allow the FBI to use its computers to guess the passcode quickly without getting locked out for making too many guesses. Apple has until February 26 to respond to the court order. The United States government has issued a license to Boeing today for them to be able to conduct negotiations with airlines in Iran. However, further approvals would be needed in addition in order to make sales. Analysts are noting that Boeing faces numerous challenges in Iran. The country may not be able to afford many of their planes, and financial backers may consider investing in leases or sales to be too risky due to the possibility of repossessing aircraft in a bankruptcy. Iran continues to fly much older Boeing planes, including 11 747s that date from 1969 to 1988, according to Flight Global. Separately, General Electric, which makes engines for Boeing planes, stated that it's also applied for a U.S. license to sell engines and parts in Iran, though it hasn't been granted yet. This has been your lowdown for February 19th, 2016.
Rise up, children. Rise up, children. Remember the victims. Remember the victims. Look within you and see what they've done. Brothers and sisters.
Welcome to the Vaccine Myth and Issue of Trust. Today is Sunday, February 21st, 2016, and I am your host, Sean Siegel. As always, we're coming to you over the auspices of the Logos Radio Network, and howdy to everyone listening on the website, and here in Austin, Texas on 89.1 or 90.1 FM, and as always to anybody else around the nation or outside the nation who may be listening to a local broadcast of the signal picked up off of Logos's website. Quickly, we have two guests today. One is waiting on the line as we speak. The second will be Greg Wyatt. He is dad to a 26-year-old autistic son, and he has been through, as you can imagine, a couple of decades of serious, devoted, dedicated research into vaccines, and he will be on the air discussing with us, of course, his son's case individually and vaccines in general, and what he labels, and with which I'm sure we'll all agree, the sickness industry. Our first guest is on the line with us. She is an attorney operating in New Jersey, but I'm sure she handles cases nationwide if they were to come her way. And I'm speaking about Phyllis Widman. And as I said, she's with us on the line. Hi, Phyllis, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Sean. Thank you for having me on the show.
Sure. We've had several other attorneys in the past, and it's always refreshing to get another viewpoint, another opinion, and just at least let people know that there are other resources are available. So let me ask you quickly, you are an attorney. What got you interested in vaccine awareness, if you will, the vaccine area? I noticed on your website, which, by the way, folks, is Widman, that's W-I-D as in Delta, WidmanLawFirm.com. And you are listed as, it says your areas of practice are vaccine injuries, vaccines and autism, And that's not what I was looking for. You said it was malpractice. You were looking at the malpractice and that type of approach. So tell me, if you will, how you got into specifically vaccine injury.
Actually, that's sort of part of what led me to vaccine injury was looking into medical malpractice cases. I was traditionally a personal injury attorney and handling different areas of personal injury, which led me to medical malpractice, and that kind of led me to vaccine injury because I think, well, being kind of medically inclined, interested in this type of law and medicine combination, and just having also life experience with people who are vaccine injured, just kind of being around, hearing about it, delving further and further into it, and I figured it was my calling. It felt like it was, and so I just started doing it.
Right. If I can ask, is anybody in your immediate family or extended family, what sort of introduction do you have, outside your personal experience?
Some family members, there's always the ongoing debate within families regarding, different family members' difficulties or, what have you that families discuss amongst each other. So, getting into specifics, I probably wouldn't do that right now, but I will say that I have experience. And then, of course, researching, you just learn more and more. I mean, every time I get online, which is daily, of course, it's more right. And more information. It's incredible.
Yeah, well, certainly for anybody, pretty much. It's hard to imagine, though. I'm sure there are still millions and millions of people out there who aren't really aware of the amount of dissent and contention between what are supposedly two sides of an argument. I would argue otherwise, but that's a whole different issue. Since there's so much vaccine, I guess agenda is the only word that comes to mind that's being displayed, manifested in front of our eyes on a daily basis, adding to the schedule, all of the supposed threats, starting with Ebola about a year ago, measles before that. Now we have the Zika scare, and all of these end up including at least mention of vaccines, either the uptake in the case of measles, the already existing vaccine, or in the case of Ebola and certainly Zika, the mention of vaccines going into theoretical production. Actually, there is a Zika vaccine apparently in Hungary, which is now being clinically tested or about to. They were actually accepting subjects, volunteers. But the point being, there's so much information that it's hard to imagine someone these days not running into stories from supposed anti-vaxxers.
Right, I agree. I mean, I do find that when I have discussions with people who are what they might perceive to be adamantly in favor of vaccinating, a lot of times I dig just a little bit further in talking with them, and I realize that they really don't want to know anything about it either way. They want to just rely on the medical profession and just not think about it. Not that they may not have, if they were to open their minds, they may end up, learning or at least seeing that there are two sides. But like I said, my experience is that a lot of people it just would rather not think about it. Maybe it's too scary for them to think about it.
Yeah, so, well, you just defined cognitive dissonance, or at least described it. Right. And then, of course, I agree with you that there's so much information, and therefore I would imagine there has to be more awareness. But when it comes to vaccine injury and the vaccine court, U.S. Court of Federal Claims, and possible compensation, I still think most people just don't know, including colleagues, lawyers, other lawyers who I speak with don't even know it exists. Right.
And I wish
incredibly, many MDs don't even realize it exists.
Right, and I also feel, at least from my experience and what I've read too, is that MDs, because they don't know about the vaccine court, they might be afraid to even talk about it, especially if someone comes to them and says they're injured, because maybe they think they'll be held liable, when in fact they're shielded from liability. So that's kind of a downside of lack of awareness, or at least one of the downsides.
Yes, they are indeed shielded from liability. God, there's so many aspects to this. Yeah, the AAP, of course, I'm sure you're aware of it, has a vaccine refusal form, which, of course, any vaccine-aware person would recommend no one ever sign as written, because it's pretty much self-incriminating. You have to admit when you sign, if indeed you sign it as written, that you're aware, in essence, that you're hurting your child by not vaccinating, which is totally absurd once you get into even a modicum of research in the area. But the AAP, while apparently I've been told, I have not found the specific statute or mention in their rules, supposedly is against just outright denial of service to anybody for not vaccinating, and yet there are so many pediatricians doing that, and more apparently joining the throng.
Yeah, I don't, in the legal realm, I don't handle anything having to do with waivers, exemptions, or anything like that. I always defer to Alan Phillips, the attorney, who knows a lot more than I do about that. I just deal with the injury or possible injury, and then the claim that may or may not ensue, and then handle that in the vaccine court. So I stay strictly along those lines. But yes, that's a whole other, or a whole, it's in combination and also apart from just vaccine injury in general. But I understand Attorney Alan Phillips is very well known, and I know he's an excellent attorney. So anything having to do with that, I defer to him.
Right, no problem. Alan's been on the show a few times before. I mean, my show 3.5 years, I guess it's been on the air, and he's been on several times, along with, of course, Patricia Finn in New York, and there are others. There are something. Tell me if I'm wrong. Like 20 or 25 or more law firms who handle vaccine court cases in the U.S.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the number of actual firms. I think the number of single attorneys is, I'm estimating, but somewhere between 115 and 130, or 40. But I have heard from other lawyers that there are some lawyers who are admitted in the United States Court of Federal Claims and who handle maybe only a few cases, in total. So I think maybe the number might be, more nebulous or difficult to determine. But the active, maybe, so to speak, group of lawyers, I guess are probably the ones listed. I know Attorney Alan Phillips also has a list of attorneys on there, too. I think there are about 25 lawyers there. So, it's a very small number of lawyers, nationally even, compared to the number of law firms in, like, a county in, say, the state of New Jersey, which is saturated with many different types of lawyers. So, yeah. Yep.
I'm curious. I've never asked any of the other attorneys that have been on the show this question. What does it take to get into, if you will, or be allowed the privilege of practicing there in special masters specifically?
The instructions for attorneys who want to be admitted to the court are online, but I had to get a couple of letters of recommendation, take a little test, and make the application, of course. And then I was accepted. So I don't know what's going on, on the other end, but that was right.
And the test would revolve around, I guess, those special procedures that you mentioned. That there are specific procedures that you should or should not follow in the court.
Actually, the test really, I think, it was mainly focused on the procedural guidelines for filing and handling just that court in and of itself, because every court is so different, state to state, and then federal to state. But then this court is, I think, different from all the other courts. So they have their own procedures, and so it was a procedural type of test.
Right. Okay. So in other words, it's not difficult in essence. That you simply have got to want to do it, have a good track record, and just bone up on what the application process is all about, and that's not a problem. But as you say, 20 firms, even 115 individual lawyers, is percentage-wise incredibly small. When you think about it. But the number of cases, of course, aren't that humongous, though there are, I don't know, a total of, I think, a couple thousand now, and I don't know how many have been rejected and that they haven't considered. Okay, Phyllis, if we will hang on, because we're coming to our first break. It's only 2 minutes, but they will fill that 2 minutes with some sort of commercial information. We'll be right back. Hold on.
Now, you are listening to the Logos Radio Network, LogosRadioNetwork.com.
We're speaking with the vaccine attorney, Phyllis Wigman. Again, the website is wigmanlawfirm.com. And Phyllis, if you will, take us through the a brief history of the protection that is now enjoyed by not just the vaccine industry, but the medical establishment as well. They called it the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. I call it the National Vaccine Industry Protection Act because that's how I see it. But nevertheless, if you would give us, if you will, a short account of the original legislation, and then it was followed some years later by another Supreme Court decision.
Right. So prior to 1986, the people who were injured, which I believe was primarily from the DPT vaccine, which is now the DTaP, with the acellular pertussis. That was a change that was made. But in the past, people brought these claims in civil court against manufacturers, and they were winning. I don't know what the exact statistics are as far as number of wins, but it was certainly enough to scare the manufacturers into wanting to go to the government and ask for, let's call it protection from liability. And they did do that, and the government, enacted the act, as you stated. And within the act, they didn't want to leave people completely helpless and not able to recover anything or get any compensation for injuries. So they developed the vaccine court. And that's actually the program that you're referring to. So within that program, they appoint special masters there are no juries, so it's not handled the exact way that a civil court case would be handled. But within the program, these special masters hear both sides of the case, one from the petitioner, obviously the one who's injured, and then the defendant is Health and Human Services, who is represented by the Department of Justice attorneys. So, and they also developed the vaccine injury table. Do you want me to get into the table? Explain that if I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah, if you would. But first, if you will, let's first cover the case we discussed off air, which is the Brucewitz case in 2011, and kind of close the door to that particular little issue, and then we'll get on to the table itself.
Okay, so within the vaccine court, there's the table of vaccines that are covered and then the injuries. If the petitioner decides to withdraw from the program or reject a decision, initially it was designed whereby the petitioner can then become a plaintiff and sue in civil court. That in 2011, there was a U.S. Supreme Court case that came down, and that case pretty much, as you said, closed the door on being able to first go to vaccine court and then still be able to sue, let's say, manufacturer in civil court. The reason why that case really, as we say, closed the door, ended up constraining plaintiffs and their ability to recover in civil court is because the court's decision held that the only real cause of action that you can have in order to successfully, be successful or even to file at this point would be that of a defective manufacturer cause of action. So it would have to be that the plaintiff is able to show that the product itself, the vaccine, was defective, and that means that it was being used for something that was not originally intended. So it occurs when a product departs from its intended design. And once that happens, then yes, there might be a cause of action, but that's pretty much impossible to show, primarily because in order to, there are about 90 federal regulations that are in place to regulate the manufacture of vaccines. So in order to, pierce that, so to speak, it would be virtually impossible. I can't imagine a situation where maybe a case would be able to prevail with that cause of action. Maybe people have discussed, a bad lot, like where 60 people or more get sick from a particular vaccine in a particular area. But I believe that was addressed as well. So at this point, vaccine court is really the only venue, not by the way it's written, but in reality and in practice, it seems they're pretty much stuck. Right.
Well, I would distinguish between, just my own personal interpretation, between a defective vaccine and one that is used for a purpose for which it's not intended. To me, a defective vaccine would mean something that, say, like the temperature was supposed to be at a certain degree or less during production, and the manufacturer screwed up, and so it was it was manufactured incorrectly. That's what I would think to be a defective vaccine, as opposed to one that's put out for use. I mean, they all have specific uses. I mean, the MMR vaccine, no doctor would ever think that vaccine was intended for pneumonia, for instance. Though someone may mess up, a nurse or a doctor may accidentally or otherwise, I don't know, it's projection, and use it for something else. So I'm a little unclear to that. Defective manufacturer to me means something that was literally manufactured incorrectly, which would indeed be virtually impossible to prove. You'd almost have to have it almost be a requirement for the vaccine manufacturer to simply come out and state that it was manufactured incorrectly.
Right, because the Brucewitz court, the Supreme Court held in that case that a design defect, which is different than defective manufacture, is covered within the program. It's preempted, by the government program, the ICP. So it would be handled in vaccine court. So I think my reading of the case is that, one can't claim that the design of the vaccine is defective and then go to civil court and try and prove that. So they seem close. I mean, I don't do product liability. It is a very separate area of law. I mean, of course, we're discussing it because it comes into play regarding vaccines. Handling those types of cases are usually federal cases, but it is my understanding, and for this reason, because of this case, vaccine court is the venue, and although it was always the proper first venue anyway, any petitioner would have to first go through the program. And that actually leads me to the table, the vaccine injury table, which has the list of vaccines that the program covers, so to speak, and will at least accept your petition under. So if you receive one of the vaccines listed on the table, then you have a valid petition, except that you also, in order to prevail, you'd have to also meet one of the table injuries or injuries set forth on the table. Some of the injuries, though, are not listed specifically, although it's my understanding that they're adding more injuries to the table. So, and that's helpful.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the new one. In fact, because we had discussed this on the phone previously, and they had a proposed addition or a change, basically adding some. I'm looking at it as we speak. They're adding some injuries to the list and perhaps some vaccines as well associated with those injuries. The first thing I'm noticing, though, well, I went to the old list to try and make a comparison. It's no longer available, so that the proposed changes are no longer proposed. They are in effect. And what was pictured on the proposed list is now the list that the official website takes you to. And there it is. I was looking for the word sequelae because I was afraid for a moment that they had left that out. And of course, right. the sequelae are the complications and such that arise from any one of the diseases that aren't covered, because if you can show that they are directly associated with the disease that's directly associated with the vaccine, then they will cover it.
Right.
So, yeah, we can go over that list in a little more detail when we come back. We got a 3-minute break. We'll be back after those 3 minutes. Hold on.
Don't touch that dial. Seriously, it may be rigged to scan your hand. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, back to tell you how a children's media corporation is developing some scary sci-fi next.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Bet you didn't know Disney had a research arm. Well, they do, and what they're developing is not child's play. How about doorknobs that recognize your touch, or phones that go silent when you wave your hand, or chairs that dim the lights when you lean back? Those are just some of the smart objects being built by Disney Research, where things around you will be aware, ever watching and anticipating your desires in an interactive, brave new world. But do we really want our furniture watching us? Once this stuff is linked to the internet, pretty soon the walls and even the doors will talk. Hey, let's lock the door on that idea. Throw away the key. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
You are listening to the Logos Radio Network. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
Well, apparently, as we discovered here in a quick conversation, there are proposed changes to the list of vaccine injuries, but those changes have not yet been added. For some reason, HRSA and Department of Health and Human Services, they changed the location of the existing list, but the changes have not yet been made.
Right.
So just review, if you will, again for us, Phyllis, exactly what that list entails and what it means. What's the significance of that list?
Okay, so if the list is, as we call it, the table, explains and sets forth which vaccines the program will accept as cases, and also which types of injuries are applicable. Now, there's some legal ramifications to this. For example, if there's what we call an on-table injury, which means that the vaccine is on the table on the left-hand side, and the injury that's covered is set forth right next to it in the center, and then if the time period within which the person reacts is also listed on the table, which is to the right in the third column, then the case, it's actually pretty much, it's considered a no-fault type of case, and that means that the court and the Department of Justice attorney will look at the facts, and if all the facts align with what's set forth on the table, then you have a higher likelihood of being compensated. Now, it gets a little more difficult when you receive the vaccine that's listed on the table, but the injury is not set forth on the table. Or the time frame is somewhat different than what's set forth on the table. In those types of cases, we have to prove causation, usually through the use of a medical expert. Can use journal articles, but often it's an expert who needs to come in and explain from the medical side of things, whether or not the vaccine caused the injury, and if so, how. Now, what's been happening and what we were just discussing was a proposal to add some of the common injuries that were originally not set forth on the table. These injuries, for example, Guillain-Barré syndrome, GBS, that particular injury is fairly common, and often when it does result, it's from the flu vaccine. So even though it's not set forth on the table, what was happening was that people were getting, for example, the flu shot and developing GBS, and the government and the court were seeing that a lot. So they were compensating based on medical, literature and testimony. They were compensating for that injury. So that, I believe, is why that's one of the proposed additions to come onto the table.
Right. So you're saying they actually deviated from their own table to award compensation?
I don't look at it as a deviation, because if you look at the table itself under the flu vaccine, it'll say no condition specified. So it's that they're not deviating, but they kind of left it, more broadly. It was just broad and more open to have a condition brought forth through a medical expert or literature in order to inform and educate the court, on a case-by-case basis. But I think what happened was they were seeing it a lot. So they're going to add that along with others like CERVA, shoulder injury related to vaccination. That's something you see, and the court was seeing, I presume. So they're going to add that to the table as well. So they do have a few. There are two more, actually. Vasovagal syncope, which is like fainting, and then disseminated vaccine strain viral disease, which is specific to the varicella vaccine, which is like a rash. I'm not sure, actually, right now. I'm in the middle of researching that exact condition for a child who received the varicella vaccine.
Right.
The doctor
right. That's something I've often spoken about, because it wasn't until 1995 when the varicella vaccine came online that at least on VAERS, on the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, we saw regularly reported on an annual basis cases of shingles following, naturally, the varicella vaccine. But some of them were in kids literally less than 12 months old. And shingles, and you can read this anywhere, used to be not totally exclusively, but pretty much reserved for adults and the elderly. I mean, the Mayo Clinic described it as shingles, that is, as a reactivation in the nervous system of the varicella virus that took place many years later, unquote. And here we had little kids, literally, less than 12 months old, who apparently had been given the chickenpox vaccine earlier than the recommended 12 to 18 months, or I believe it's right at 12 months, who very quickly developed shingles, which is bizarre and kind of speaks to other effects of the vaccines that are not discussed that often. But maybe that's what they're referring to as shingles after the varicella vaccine.
Right. That's my understanding. Now, these are proposed, I believe, so I don't know which changes will actually be made or exactly when.
Right. Well, you're handling cases now, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. What came to mind while you were speaking before was one specific case. And it's not the only one like it, but for various reasons, you'll see why in a second. I was going to bring it up. We interviewed a woman about a year ago she and her husband lost their 3-month-old little boy within, they're not sure, somewhere between 10 and 15 hours after vaccination. He died. He showed the signs, and I almost shudder now when I see people list it as something they witnessed in their child after vaccination. The little boy was lethargic. They had him in a car seat in the back, and some of the friends or the family members saw him, and everybody remarked, "What's wrong with him?" Or in some cases, and this is surreal. I mean, it's bizarre. In some cases, said, "Oh, look how peaceful he is. That's not like him," and he was lethargic. Which again was unlike his typical behavior, and that was at 1:30 in the afternoon. He had these round of vaccinations. They put him down to bed at 10 o'clock and went in to check him at 3 o'clock, and he had died. When the mother did not want to broach the whole idea of going to the vaccine court. She was simply grieving too much, and no matter what they did, they weren't going to get their infant back. They weren't going to get their baby back. The father, however, said no, he wants to do it just for the principle. But after 2 or 3 visits with the attorneys, he was told that even though this happened so quickly and so obviously, and a child who was, I think he'd had a slight cold, but otherwise, in essence, apparently pretty healthy, and then such a sudden catastrophe occurring right after vaccination, in essence, that nevertheless the government would be out to show that, if they could, that there was parental abuse involved. And that was so discouraging to the father, he just said, "I can't do this either," and he left. So it just brought that to mind. I mean, there's lots of stories like that, but perhaps down the line, as you get more experience, you'll become more aware of it, or maybe you'll find out that it's maybe not as widespread as I think. Yeah,
I hope not. It's tragic.
Well, to say the least. And I just want to point out one thing. We'll have one more segment available for the interviews. Just to bring that up, Phyllis, we'll be coming down to the break here in another half a minute or so. But there's one that always gets me on this list. It just blows my mind every time I see it, and that's chronic arthritis. That vaccines containing rubella, which is the MMR or the MR or the R, the rubella vaccine, that within a week to 6 weeks, somewhere in that 5-week period, you can develop chronic arthritis. And it's the only one that has the arthritis involved with it. But when you think about a medical procedure that's supposed to prevent disease that can give you arthritis, it's
easy.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue.
Phyllis, if you would, go ahead and give your final message, in essence, now, because we've just discussed it, and you want to let the audience know that...
these sometimes people do have bad reactions to vaccines, and that's a real thing. Otherwise, the court and the program would not have been set up. So, if someone feels that even in their gut that they're injured and that it was as a result of receiving a vaccine, then they should do further research, talk to their doctor about that specifically, and then also research online. Vaccine attorneys, not just me, any and all vaccine lawyers or whoever they want to try and reach out to just to get more information. I feel terrible that some people are out there and have some type of condition and they just can't seem to find answers, the cause of it, and then be disabled and unable to work or take care of their families or, have an enjoyment really anymore for life and not know that they could be compensated. Of course, many of the cases, are not successful, but I feel that people should know that the court is there and it was set up for injured people because it does happen. And thankfully it's not too common, but it does happen.
Right. Well, it appears at least not to be too common, but I will point out that the CDC itself says literally verbatim that a very small percentage of actual vaccine reactions are ever reported. So we don't know. And part of that, of course, is because of what we've already discussed. There are so many doctors, nurses, CVS pharmacists, which is really crazy, who aren't aware that the court even exists or that the vaccine injury table even exists. It ostensibly, I think, it actually is phrased in the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act from 1986 that it is compulsory, it's mandated, mandatory for an MD to report any listed on the table reaction to theirs if it takes place in his or her patient. And yet, as I said, CDC itself says very small percentage of actual adverse reactions ever get reported. So, yeah, there's a horrible, horrible schism of lack of information out there, even to the MDs and certainly to the parents.
Yep. Well, if people go online, they will definitely see. They can go to the United States Court of Federal Claims website. Most things are laid out there, and then from there they can do further research if they choose.
Right. And I'll point out that even though there are few and far between cases of severe injury, there has been over $3 billion paid out. And if I'm not wrong, Phyllis, I think in the 5 or 6 years preceding the actual act, the NBCIA, there was something on the order of $5 or $6 billion that had been paid out back then, which in today's dollars probably would be closer to 10 or 12 billion dollars. That was now 45 or 50 years ago. So yeah, they were in trouble. And it's kind of incredible that an industry would be covered for that type of liability, protected against that liability, specifically because there was so much liability, because there was so much having to be paid out. It kind of boggles the mind from that perspective.
Yep. Well, thank God, there is a program in place, at least. And, like I said, people can do their research and talk to their doctors and maybe reach out to, lawyers. It doesn't have to be someone in their area. I do want to point that out because it's a federal court. So anyone
right. And I assume you handle cases from pretty much anywhere in the nation.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. As you just pointed out, would probably most, if not all, of the other attorneys.
Right. Exactly. All of us. Yeah.
Yeah. And it would make no difference what state you're from, as you said, because this is all federal, the federal guidelines and federal table, et cetera. So, are you expecting to bring any of the cases to fruition anytime soon, or do you think it's going to take a while? Any idea?
They maybe one or two soon, hopefully. So.
How long do they take? Any idea? I mean, do these take a year, 2 years? Do they really drag on, or are they relatively quick, or is there no typical?
Yeah, it varies. It seems to vary. Just depends on the vaccine and the injury, whether or not it's on table or off table. Experts who are involved or not. So it really just depends. It is, litigation. I mean, you have the two sides, and you have the parties, and then you have the potential for experts involved. So, it varies. Right.
So I assume that in your travels down this road, you're gathering names of pediatric neurosurgeons and neurologists, et cetera, who can be called for you. I mean, does that take place in the court? You can call your own witnesses, because I know for sure that the government will call medical experts.
Yes, yep. We can call. We get experts. They can write. They can testify. Yeah, it's actually handled fairly in that regard. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But in other ways, it seems to be quite different from a regular court. There's no jury. There's a 3-judge panel. Is that right?
No, it's one judge, one special master, and no jury. That's correct. Yep.
Oh, really? So, just a single person?
Right.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah,
okay.
Single person with two sides, right? So, in an adversarial scheme, the two sides fighting as hard as they can, within the bounds of the law, and then the judge or special master makes the ultimate decision, or the two sides can settle on their own. So there's also a mediation program in place too. So they have it's handled, I believe, fairly in that way. So I'm pleased with going forward and practicing in that arena.
Right.
And people do get compensated, and that's the goal. If they're truly injured and they need assistance, especially when they need assistance going forward in their lives, and if you have a child or a young person or a young adult, they may need care, for many years to come, and that's what it's really set up for. I believe
right.
So.
Well, and in many cases for life, that they would need the care, and I think there are cases, I'm sure, where there have been well over $1 million that for an individual injury that has been awarded. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were cases where there were several millions of dollars awarded because you get a child that is severely injured, transverse myelitis or such, where just the nervous system and motor functions themselves are shot, and there's all sorts of other terrible stuff that goes with it, as we know. But if the child can't be helped, because oftentimes they can, but if they cannot, then yes, it can run into a virtual treasury's worth of expenses.
That's right. Yep. Absolutely. So, yeah, hopefully, if people are just aware, to have people be injured or sick and not know, that's unfortunate. So.
Yeah, and that's got to be the case in most cases, because if most aren't being reported, then amongst those are all the severe ones that would be likely successful if they were brought in front of the vaccine court, and yet they're simply not reported. And really, that's really tragic, because those folks could possibly be reimbursed, at least for their expenses. The other aspects certainly can't be undone or countered in any way that's meaningful, but at least they could get their monies. Yeah, I guess that would be the one of the biggest boons would be if there was some sort of national push to alert all MDs and all parents. That would be a wonderful program on the part of the CDC to alert parents that VAERS even exists.
Right. Yeah, well, actually, someone was telling me how they were receiving like a piece of paper that had the pros and cons to being vaccinated prior to vaccinating their child. So, and on, I guess, one of the sides, on the cons, I would imagine, on the bottom it said that if there's an adverse reaction, to report it to VAERS. So it seems maybe there's just not a consistent amount of information. Because in that case, it was good that there was at least some information and knowledge, Right.
Those are the VIS vaccination or vaccine information sheets that are apparently created and published by CDC. And they ostensibly, they're supposed to be given out every time a vaccine is given. I mean, even on repeated visits, they're supposed to be given out. And from my experience, they rarely are.
Right. So I heard that in this situation, it was given to the person. So, yeah, I would just hope that they are. If they were given to everyone, if half the people read them, at least they would know more about it. They still, would go forward with the vaccination, but then if there was a problem, they would at least be aware. So I think that's important.
Oh, definitely. Okay, we're coming down to closing seconds. I appreciate it. You are, in comparison with some of the other attorneys, kind of almost just getting started. And I wish you the best of luck for yourself and certainly the families whom you are representing.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on the show.
Sure.
I enjoyed it. It was great. So.
Me too. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Was a child so strong, every baby never was nothing we could do.
Welcome back to the Vaccine Myth and Issue of Trust. Today is still Sunday, February 21st, 2016. And we have on the phone with us Greg Wyatt, dad to an autistic son, but we will be getting to him in just a moment. As always, I've got to say a word about the song to which we were listening on the way back into the show. They Took My Baby Away. I'll be succinct as I can. It's the story of the singer, Michael Belkin, his infant daughter, 5-week-old daughter, Lila Rose, who died 15 hours after a Hep B vaccine given to her at 5 weeks of age. Still trying to make a long story short, now, some 18 years later, the Belkins have 2 more children, and they also have testified to Congress. They have looked in the congressional record for any note of the vaccine damage they were told was found in the brain of their daughter. Brain damage was detected during a forensic examination. The coroner told that to the Belkins shortly after their daughter's death. But shortly after that, in a person-to-person conversation with the coroner and Mr. Belkin, he was told that Lila Rose's death will be listed as sudden infant death syndrome with no mention of the brain damage that they themselves had said they had detected. And as we know, it's in the Health and Human Services table of vaccine injuries we were just discussing with Phyllis Woodman. It's listed in the Merck manual. Vaccines are listed as a cause of encephalopathy, which is brain damage. Nevertheless, that was left out of the record. And while the conversation was going on between the coroner and Mr. Belkin, her supervisor carefully monitored the conversation to be sure that there was no black eye given to the vaccination paradigm. That is a horrible situation, but it's one that we have faced, are facing, and will face into the unforeseeable future unless somehow we do something about it. These people aren't going to stop, not of their own accord. And I think my guest will agree with me. Hi, Greg, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. You have a 26-year-old son with autism. And I'll just... No,
he's 18. You got that wrong, but we got everything else right. He's 18 years old. He just turned 18 in a couple weeks ago.
Oh, okay. All right. 18 years, but the rest, and of course, what I'm reading off of is an article on vaccinecommonsense.com. And you will find an article there by Greg. And it's titled, When My Son Was Born, the Autism Rate Was 1 in 10,000. Today, the autism rate is 1 in 18 for 2-year-old males. And I would point out that we're really following suit here. My original projections made almost 4 years ago predicted for the year 2017, 1 in 10 for males born in the United States to be on the autism spectrum. That goes down to 1 in 5 in only 5 years, 1 in 2 5 years later. And by, my goodness, a short 12 or 13 years from now, it will be 1 in 1, theoretically. For males, and the females will join, unfortunately, only 6 or 8 years later. But Greg, if you would start at the beginning when your son developed the autism or was diagnosed, and I assume this had something to do with vaccines.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, my son is 18, and he's at the level of a 3 to 4-year-old. And I do have a daughter, and she has it too. I don't say much about that because my son is severe, my daughter is moderate. While my son is 18, he's like a, say 4 to 5-year-old. My daughter is 16, and she's like an 8-year-old. So my kids never grew up. My wife and I wanted a family. We had some infertility issues, so we adopted my son, and we adopted him right from the hospital. We knew the birth parents, the boy and the girl. They were both drug-free, healthy, non-drinkers, non-smokers, and we were excited. My son was born on Groundhog's Day, 1998. Previous to that, my wife had said to me, you got to remember this, the infancy of the Internet. She says, Greg, there's a strange new affliction that's getting I think it was 1 out of 185 is what she quoted me. 1 out of 185 boys are getting a strange new affliction called autism. I never had heard of autism, and I was drinking the Kool-Aid then. I was under the influence that pharmaceutical companies were here to help us. Doctors have our best interests in mind. And I told her, I remember saying, they wouldn't do that. And then I thought, 1 out of 185, I said, well, even if it is true, what are the chances of my son getting it? So, Sean, I blame myself for stupidity. So my son was born. 15 months later, my daughter was born. And same birth mother and birth father, which is a whole another story, but we were blessed. My daughter was born perfect. My son was born perfect. Matter of fact, my son was doing great the first year of his life, but unknown to us, he was suffering from delayed vaccine damage. We decided to space out the vaccines. Spacing out poison doesn't do any good. That's what vaccines are. They're all full of all sorts of toxins. So we waited to, at the time, Sean, everybody said it's the MMR, it's the MMR, it's the MMR. You had Dr. Wakefield, he was bringing the MMR up, which, yeah, I would say so. Putting mercury in a needle and injecting it is, of course, the doctors say, oh, it's just such a minuscule amount. So we decided to do an abbreviated vaccine schedule. And my son received 3 DTaPs, 3 Hibs, 3 poliovirus vaccines. So he would get 3 vaccines on 3 different occasions. And he was inoculated at 2 months, 4 months, and 5.5 months. I noticed something very strange about 9 months into his life is that his right eye crossed over to his left. And I didn't think much about it, except it was strange. I thought it was something that would correct itself. Well, one of the easiest ways to see if your kid has vaccine damage is look in their eyes. God's made it very, very easy.
Right.
So we vaccinated him on last vaccine, August 22nd, 1999, the MMR. Later, about 2-3 months later, he starts acting strange. See, you have, Sean, and people don't understand it, you have immediate vaccine reaction, and you have delayed vaccine reaction. This is how insidious this whole program is. It's the dumbing down of society on a gradual basis.
Right.
And so,
yes, sir. They're waiting for sanity to disappear just from attrition, if nothing else.
Well, it's pretty much gone in the younger people. Well, anyway, back to my story. It's now 2000, and he's full-blown autistic. He's head-banging, toe-walking, hand flapping, constantly screaming in a high pitch, totally upset all the time. He had constant ear infections, stomach infections, constipation, throwing up 6 to 12 times a week at night for months at a time. My wife, my wonderful wife, which I couldn't do this without her. Now, you got to remember, I'm 61 years old. I'm not a young father. 90% of parents with autistic or vaccine-damaged kids end in divorce. And believe me, I hate to say it, but if I was younger, I don't think I would have made it. I would have cut out. There's no man in their 20s and 30s, very few, I don't want to be absolute, very few guys that are going to stick around for head-banging, toe-walking, hand-flapping, screaming, 24/7. And that was just the start. Now, the doctor, we went to him, and he could never give us an answer to what was wrong. He'd always tell us to alternate Tylenol for pain and Motrin for fever, which is absolutely the worst thing you can do.
Yep.
Shows you how much these doctors of pharmacia death know. Now, we didn't know, but it made his condition much, much worse and accelerated his original vaccine injuries by destroying his immune system, primarily his gut, and it went to his brain. He had encephalopathy, the swelling of the brain. That's why he was beating his brains out, because his pain was so bad. Now, we enrolled him in early childhood interventions due to his delays at the age of about 2 years old. And on his 3rd birthday, on February 2nd, Groundhog's Day 2001, before the infamous 9/11, we took him to a pediatric psychologist for testing. We didn't think anything big was going to happen. Well, I was there by myself, and the lady looks at me after testing him for a couple hours. He said, Greg, your son is severely mentally retarded, and his IQ was measured this morning at 43. Now, 15 years later, 15 years of hell for this little boy, who's now a man, functioning at the level of a 4 to 5 year old. He requires 24-hour-a-day care, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and will for the rest of his life. He's still not 100% potty trained and requires someone to help him stay hygienically clean. He also needs full-time help with dressing, cooking, and every aspect of his life that we take for granted. And we as a family, like all the other vaccine-damaged families out there, we're never going to be able to live our lives in a normal manner. People got to remember, Sean, God created us with an incredible immune system, and it doesn't require chemical injections designed by the Rockefellers to build an immune system. And
exactly. Hang on, Greg. We'll be back after 2 minutes. Hold on.
This is the Logos Radio Network.
Greg, it's one of the questions I was going to ask is whether or not you had ever approached the Special Masters, and I was kind of assuming you had not, but you just surprised me and said, yes, you have. Please tell us about that.
Well, we had heard of this new claim, the United States Court of Federal Claims, in which back in 1986, the pharmaceutical companies, through Congress, gave themselves immunity because their products were so safe and effective. Yeah, right. Like a Ford Pinto. Well, anyway, so we filed on February 4th, 2004, a petition for vaccine compensation in the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, where we alleged that various vaccinations injured my son. Well, we waited for 7 years. We were one of the first test cases. And honestly, Sean, I thought the government would do the right thing. I thought that's what this court was for. And I really believed that my son was going to be compensated 6 to 7 figures because it was so evident to us what had happened to him. Well, we got the ruling back, and back in August 17th, 2011, our entitlement was denial without hearing. They took all of our paperwork that we had meticulously put together over a period of years, all the suffering, all the pain, all of his records, which I have right here in front of me. But what we didn't know about was the table injury. So where they allowed these vaccine companies to skirt the law with this court ruling that gave them immunity, they were also smart enough to put a condition on it that you had to meet the table injury. But what people didn't know is vaccines are so insidious, and this is what I've came through my research to believe and understand 100%, is that the reason they did it is they knew that these vaccines don't cause immediate damage. It can be noticed in a day or a week or a month. But it has an effect of building up and getting worse and getting worse and getting worse. And before you know it, your child is either so vaccine injured or maybe worse. It is the biggest scam system I've ever seen in my life. And believe me, I've seen it all. I've been doing this for a long time. But let me point something out too, Sean, is I was still drinking the Kool-Aid up until about a year or two ago. I didn't want to believe that I had anything to do with my son and daughter's vaccine injury. And the reason that I say that is I couldn't, at the time, I didn't think I could live with myself. And I would tell all my friends and all my family members that my son Weston and Emily, they got autism because of hereditary and environmental factors. That is a lie that they want you to believe. It's a lie from the pit of hell. See, they have this thing all figured out. But what they haven't figured out is that people are waking up a little bit, and Big Pharma, these vaccine companies, they're getting a little nervous. They're getting a little nervous because you got to understand, for every 3 Gardasil shots that they don't sell, that's $170 a shot times 3. That's $500. A gallon of Gardasil retails for over $1 million, but probably causes $100 million in damages. See, there is no money in keeping us well and healthy. They want to maintain our sickness, keep us on pills, just like all these kids with autism. I'll say one thing right now. My son, he's not on any medication. He hasn't had a vaccine in over 15 years. And his immune system is very healthy, but the damage has been done. His brain has been destroyed. He's incapable of ever being the man that God created him to be because the evilness of mankind is shocking. Like I said, I'm soon to be 61. I thought that I'd seen everything, but every day I find out that I'm just beginning to learn. Now, I want to say one thing, and then I'll let you talk for a little bit. I've got some places that you can see my son and my daughter. I have over 200 videos that I've been doing for the last 8 years. It's on YouTube. It's autismnews.com, spelled out long. AUTISMNEWSDOTCOM. Or my son's all over there. You could probably just type in Weston and autism, and you can see what a wonderful human being this little boy is. To me, he's always, even though he's 18 and fully developed, he's still my little boy. And the other thing is I have a couple YouTube channels. Facebook. As long as they leave them up, and I got a feeling that Facebook is going to go away, especially for guys like me. And
I wouldn't be surprised.
My main page that I just put up is Vaccine Injury Memorial. Vaccine Injury Memorial. And I started it 2-3 days ago, and I've got a total of about 275 vaccine stories up. 275. And people, I'm adding them almost by the day now. People are waking up. One of the big lies is this vaccination rate. I go out and I call it witnessing to people, and I got away. I put together another channel on vaccine truth education to teach other people what I know. Now, I'm a natural salesman, marketer, so God's given me the talent to do what I'm doing, to teach other people how to approach anybody at any time in a way that is non-threatening. And you can go to the Vaccine Truth Education site. I also have Vaccine Truth Movement, and where we just get together and post and repost things that have to do with vaccines and vaccine injuries. But so I'm trying to do everything I can to wake people up because the lies are so deep. One of the things, the last thing is that the rate of people that vaccinate is much, much lower than what the mainstream lying media will tell you. My statistics show that at least the people in my area, the vaccine rates may be 60 to 70%. So that means 20 to 30% of people are not getting vaccinated.
Now, is that completely unvaccinated or is that partially vaccinated?
I would say that's a good question. I would say mothers in my area, oh, no, we don't do that. And if they say, oh, yeah, my son's fully vaccinated, then I will say, have you ever looked and seen what's in them? And this is with a picture of my vaccine-injured kid in my office. And I tell them a little story. This is my son. He's 18. They go, oh, he's a handsome kid. And I go, well, he's severely vaccine-injured. When you use that word, vaccine-injured, people, their jaws drop. Then right. I go in and I say, ask them, is your son vaccinated? They go, yeah, but we didn't know. The doctor said it was for his health. And then right. I tell them my story, and they just the
doctor never told us what the potential damages would be.
Here's the astounding thing: 20%, 1 out of 5 of these parents that vaccinated their kids will say something like, "I was wondering why my kid's 4 years old and he doesn't talk."
Phew.
Oh my God! I can look at these kids. I can see vaccine damage by looking at someone. That spaced out look. My daughter at the age of 5, she didn't talk.
Okay, Greg, hang on. We got a second break coming up just here in a couple of seconds. Be back in 3 minutes. Hold on.
Are you too clean for your own good? According to new research, being too conscientious about dirt and germs could actually make you sick. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and I'll be back with some antibacterial products you might want to avoid.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This public service announcement is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
A University of Michigan study suggests that antibacterial soaps and hand sanitizers could make your family sick. Many contain the chemical triclosan, an antimicrobial. Young people with higher levels of triclosan in their systems are more likely to be diagnosed with allergies and hay fever. Scientists believe the chemical may interfere with the body's immune system by mimicking or affecting human hormones. Triclosan may also prevent kids from dealing with everyday germs, so they don't develop a natural immunity to them. So if you want a healthy clean, skip the antibacterial products and wash up with good old-fashioned soap and water. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht. More news and information at CatherineAlbrecht.com.
Chemtrails.
Looking for some truth? You found it. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
Greg, you were just saying that autism basically is not real. I agree wholeheartedly. It's basically a label that I see them using as a way to avoid, first of all, admitting the severity of vaccine damage, and secondly, from paying for it. Because in 2010, I was going to ask you whether your son was part of it, specifically the autism omnibus or omnibus autism hearing. I forget which way they called it, in which close to 5,000 cases that had specifically submitted to get compensation for autism, when if they had instead been aware of that table that you said you were not aware of, and most folks certainly aren't, they would have maybe broached it from the aspect of encephalopathy instead and had more success. But they didn't. They used the autism diagnoses, and of course, the using 5 cases and doing it fraudulently, as pretty well exposed on YouTube. They denied all 5,000 cases in one fell swoop, one opinion.
Absolutely, the real truth, and I came up with this. I wrote it on a card because I was able to figure it out. The real truth is that autism does not exist. It's just a label for chemically induced brain damage delivered by injection and called vaccination. Let me ask you, Sean, what kind of people would do this to infants? Inject them with toxoids that destroy their immune system, destroy their brain, and make them dependent on the state for services for the rest of their life. It's called insanity. It's a stimulus program. I'll never forget when Nancy Pelosi, they brought all these people that are on food stamps up. And she said, food stamps make our country stronger because it's like a stimulus program. For every dollar that we spend in food stamps, we get $1.65 back in revenue. And I never forgot that. All these kids are with vaccine damage is a stimulus program. That's just
there's a lot of people think it's even more to it than that, but at very least, a stimulus program.
Yeah, well, everything always comes down to money. You got to remember this. Somewhere right now, there's a guy that's on the pharmaceutical boards. You know, they all come out of the government. They all come out of the CDC. He's down in Dubai on his yacht with his fleet of BMWs and all of his girls, and he's making $80,000 a week. Doesn't have to work. The money's delivered to him. And he's a merchant of death. That's what these pharmaceutical companies are, Sean, especially the vaccine companies, but the pill pushers aren't much better. It's just legalized drug addiction, legalized selling. If we would do what they're doing, we would be put in prison forever.
Right.
A lot of people have been.
Yes, they have. And what you said is exactly true. And it's the same companies in many cases that are producing the pills that are producing the vaccines. So it's the same companies that over these last 4, 5, 6 years have been fined literally billions of dollars for wrongs they have done, whose inter-office communications are sometimes leaked somehow, unfortunately, and are quoted by people like Sherry Tenpenny in her book, where they verbatim tell each other in their executive inter-office communications that they need to hide the results of their clinical studies, whether it be a vaccine or a more typical drug sold over the counter, that there were severe adverse reactions to those products, and they literally hide them under the table. Yeah, these if you're religious, you would consider them the satanic.
Oh, and I am religious. Thank God I got Jesus in my life, and I'm not a Bible thumper. I just know through my journey in this world that God has revealed to me a lot of truths. And it's my job, especially with my kids, to alert people on the realities of vaccine damage and how it affects society as a whole. Look what they did to California. In Australia, I mean, I have friends all throughout the world. I mean, literally thousands of friends, people that know me, that respect my opinion, that know I'm here for them. Matter of fact, my autism advocacy, my vaccine damage advocacy, I spend 40 to 50 hours a week online as an online warrior because I want to teach people not only the truth, but how to get through to their friends. Now, you got to remember, some people, they're so closed-minded that you can't do anything to convince them of truth. You can't do anything, not to convince them, but to lead them to reality. To those people that their minds are made up, I never argue with anybody, Sean.
Right.
I don't have time for stupidity. And if these people are that naive to believe this crock that's being placed out there, then let them just go ahead and do it. I hope their kids don't get sick. I hope they don't get autism. But I'll tell you what, every child, in my opinion, that has ever been vaccinated has lost a certain percentage of their mental capabilities and their physical health. Now, it could be as low as 0.1%, 1%, could be 1%. 10 years ago, I was still getting flu shots. My wife says, don't get flu shots. I go, well, I got to get one because I don't want to get the flu. I know what it's like to be stupid, to be on the other side of the coin.
Right.
And I'll no longer do that. And I'll speak out until I take my last breath. And I'll do it in honor of my vaccine-injured kids and in hopes that even if I wake up one person and save them from going through the vaccine hell that millions of Americans have gone through, it certainly was worth it.
Yeah, amen. I consider, if I get a message, and I do once in a while, saying, hey, you were instrumental in my decision to not vaccinate, that's a reason to open a bottle of champagne, because that's a major, major victory. We can't wait for society to change its mind. The powers that be that are manifesting this horrific agenda will not change. There's a reason that the CDC will never, has never, is not, and will never implement a study of the overall health outcomes of the vaccinated versus the completely unvaccinated. And unfortunately, we both know enough by now, Greg, that if they did, we couldn't trust their results anyway.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
It really is crazy. I'm an atheist, and I think they're satanic. So, it's like, I mean, even if you view it as a metaphor, there's evil afoot. The people who are at the top of this chain, the people who are really in control, and we're talking about not just the managers and even the executives of these pharmaceutical companies, but the financial powers behind them that run them, they actually control them. There's no monetary greed there. They have enough money for themselves and their progeny for generations. The motivation is other.
Well, it's eugenical. I'm sure you know about eugenics, and all this is a form of eugenics. It's population control. It's Agenda 21, and this is normal stuff. I mean, I'm not saying anything that should upset anybody because the people that are doing this know what they're doing. And they don't care about you and me. Realistically, they really don't care. We'll make a little tiny ding in their multi-billion-dollar industry, but they're too busy doing evil things. And there's the only way that we can make a difference is one-on-one. One person tells one person that tells one person. It's like a multi-level marketing plan. Waking people up one person at a time, and that's what I do. I'll give you my Facebook locations one more time, as long as they leave them up.
Okay, well, hang on. You're giving to us when we come back.
Easy.
Okay, Greg, we're in our last segment of conversation. So, yes, please give out the access information again for your various Facebook pages, et cetera.
Absolutely. The one I put up this week is just, I've got almost over 275 vaccine injury stories posted on it. They're just pouring in. Nobody's ever done this before, and I was just kind of led to do it. I wanted to put an online memorial for those people that either have been themselves or have family members that are vaccine injured or have died. So I put together the Vaccine Injury Memorial, and it's online. It's growing like crazy. It's being really well received. I started out with the Vaccine Truth Movement. That was my original group. And then I decided that I wanted to help other people learn how to approach other people in a non-threatening way, one where you're not going to get a lot of rejection. You can learn how to walk away, and it's called Vaccine Truth Education. But what started me out many years ago, before I even knew the truth about vaccine injury, is I put together a YouTube channel. It was autismnews.com, AUTISMNEWSDOTCOM. That's the name of the YouTube channel. And you probably can just put my son's name in, Weston, and autism. Our videos have had over 1 million views. So that's how I started out without even trying on doing what I do. And I would just like to take a moment. And don't think this is weird, but I would like to publicly thank Mark Zuckerberg for allowing us to have a voice. Now, I know that Mark is pro-vaccine, and that's fine. I don't slam people for their individual thoughts, but I want to thank him for giving our movement a voice, the vaccine injured a voice. And I want to pray for Mark Zuckerberg every single day and the people at the CDC that they would wake up and see the reality of what's going on. Now, if they really realize what's going on, I don't think the people at the CDC are all evil. I think they're terribly misinformed. And I think that changes can be made in their heart if they just simply wake up and listen to people that have stories like myself. I'm beyond angry. It doesn't do any good. I'm very sad. I'm very, very sad that our society has come to what it is. Growing up in the 60s and 70s, I thought life was just going to keep on going on. In the 80s, like it was. In the 80s, it was still pretty good. The 90s, it started changing. With the advent of this electronic age, the internet, things have changed 360 degrees. People no longer can relax. They always have to be electronically engaged. And you combine that with vaccines and brain damage, we have a bunch of people that are walking around like zombies, that don't know how to interact, that don't know how to be good to their common man. You know, when I was growing up, we had respect for humanity. If you seen an old lady standing at a street corner, you'd want to help her cross the street. These days, you'll just get run over. There's no common love between humanity like it used to be, unless you're in our age group, unless you're in your 70s, your 60s, your 50s. Because, see, then you can remember the way that life used to be. But if you're a millennial in your 30s, you have no clue how pristine and how wonderful the United States of America used to be. And it tears my heart out to look around me and see what's going on, and nobody gets it.
Well, it's not stupidity, it's naivete. You used that word before, and I think that's probably more apt, at least until the point at which you are informed and someone tries to raise your eyebrow. And, you know, as widespread as the vaccine awareness movement is, Greg, I still think that percentage-wise, the number of people that have actually had some sort of poignant, pertinent, relevant information put in front of their eyes is very, very small. I mean, it could be in the hundreds of thousands, but we have, you know, over 300 million people in this nation, and tens and tens of millions of them are the parents who are vaccinating their kids. And there's still a great number of those who really have never seen anything that might stand a chance of prying open at least one, if not both, of their eyes. It's unfortunate, and it's more than sad, but it's certainly at least sad, in particular for the kids who are suffering, and certainly, as you well know, for their families as well. But the information has to be put out there, but for the most part, it's a naivete that's understandable. I mean, we are taught from the word go to trust the very people that it turns out we should not trust. They are not there to help us. We are told, and we're told, that they are. Our public health authorities are not interested in public health. They're interested in public sickness and worse. And it becomes all too painfully obvious the more and more you research. And you can't stop.
It's not about the cure. It's about maintaining the sickness.
Right.
War isn't about war. It's about money. Can you imagine? Won't get into that. Could you imagine if we didn't have any war? The people that are in these wars, we don't want to be in war. Nobody wants to go to war, but there's no money in peace. Wars have been a moneymaker back for 100 or 200 years. And again, that's the way that it is. Most people that look at it, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's the truth. All you have to do is dig deep enough. One of the problems is people cannot make it in today's society. They have to work 80 hours a week just to pay the rent. People don't have time to pay attention. They're so busy trying to put food on the table. And if you're one of these poor people in Australia, my gosh, if you are on public assistance and you don't get your kids vaccinated, your money goes away. The checks stop. And that's what it's coming to here in our country. It's that way almost in California. I'm blessed to be in Arizona because we're pretty, I don't want to use the word liberal state, but we're a fairly smart group of people down there that run the state of Arizona, and they understand. But what I would encourage all your listeners to is to start doing research and touching other people. Learn how to bring it up in conversation. The Vaccine Truth Education. Go there. It's a great place to start. And there's Brandy Vaughn. I want to give a shout out to Brandy Vaughn. Just go ahead and you can Google her. They just put a ton of money and effort into the most dynamic package of postcards, billboards, inserts, you name it. It's all factual. Now, Brandy used to work for Merck during the Vioxx scam, in which lots of people died, and they took Vioxx off the market, and she asked herself, wow, look at what I've done. So now she's a voice against Big Pharma, and she's being persecuted, but she's standing up, and she's making a difference. If you don't stand up and talk to other people and get out from behind the keyboard, please. There's probably about 500,000 people right now this Sunday at this moment being a keyboard warrior, which is very much appreciated, especially if you're doing research to learn more. But you've got to get out. And I want to teach you how to do that. Vaccine Truth Education. It is so easy. I'll show you how to never deal with an idiot. You just walk away. If somebody wants to argue, I don't argue with anybody. I don't need to.
Right.
I'm not putting myself down to their level. But you have to have the finesse to know what to say and when to say it, when to hold them, and when to fold them.
Yeah, and you got to be able to read the personalities, too. I mean, every individual needs to hear something different or maybe the same piece of information delivered in a certain different way with a certain different inflection. So you got to be paying attention and reading the personality of the person you're trying to inform, but which I'm sure you do. But yeah, you can't argue. I long ago started telling people that there's that arguing or quote debating, which is an absurd thing to associate with vaccine discussions, but they're futile. Because it implies from the beginning that there are two sides, so it's a losing cause. There's no point doing it.
Here, I want to give a shout out to Brandy Vaughn. The website is Learn the Risk. Just type in Brandy Vaughn, VAUGHAN. Learn the Risk.
Right. Yeah. Now I discussed her a few weeks back. In fact, I posted some of her billboards because Dynamic was a perfect description of what she does. The beautiful billboards. I've never seen anything that I would think be more effective.
2 weeks ago, I came across her website, and they updated all of their print materials, and it made my week. I went online, and I ordered everything that they had to offer, and you cannot believe how you can use these.
Greg, hey, we're literally in the last seconds, man. We're about to close down. Thank you for being here.